This video is sponsored by Card Kingdom. You can visit their store by using my referral link in the description below. Hi everyone, I'm Hone, and it's Friday. That means it's time for another MTG Top 10, the series where I rank cards based on their historical performance at Magic's highest level of competition. One of my goals with this series is to eventually do an MTG Top 10 on every single set, and today we're taking a look at Champions of Kamigawa. It's a good time to take a look at this because the next set is also set on the plane of Kamigawa, albeit 1,000 years into the future. I have a soft spot for Champions of Kamigawa because it was actually the first set I ever played limited with regularly, and that's still my favorite way to play Magic. Anyway, Kamigawa has something of a bad reputation, with people often talking about the whole block as if it's underpowered. This isn't something that actually stands up to any scrutiny though. Kamigawa block had several cards that have had long-term impacts on Magic. In fact, all 10 cards on this list have put up top 8s at major events in the very recent past. Some of that reputation as weak comes from the fact that Mirrodin block, which came before Kamigawa block, was absurdly powerful, but Kamigawa has a pretty good track record even if you compare it to Mirrodin block. I've already done a video on Saviors of Kamigawa, which is definitely the worst of the three sets, but even it had some pretty important cards. Champions is way better though, as is Betrayers, and I'll be looking at the second set in Kamigawa block at some point later this month. Anyway, Champions of Kamigawa was the first set in Kamigawa block, which was released on October 1st, 2004. Kamigawa, as you probably know, was a Japanese-inspired set, and it reimagines many aspects of Japanese history and culture in a magic-y way. To be eligible for this video, a card had to receive its very first printing in Champions of Kamigawa. Reprints were not eligible. This means 283 cards from Champions of Kamigawa were eligible for this video, and in it, we'll talk about the 10 that have left the biggest impact on competitive Magic. Before we get started, here's a quick reminder on how I score cards in these videos. A first tier top 8 is worth 2 points. This includes events like Pro Tours, Mythic Championships, and Set Championships. And a second tier top 8 is worth 1 point. This includes Grand Prix, Magic Fests, and Magic Online Challenges. Alright, let's get to the list. At number 10, it is Azusa, Lost But Seeking. Azusa comes with a powerful ability to allow you to play 2 additional lands on every turn. This means that the turn you play her, you can play 2 more lands if you've got them. Effects like this are often not quite as good as they look because making sure you actually have the lands to take advantage of such an effect is not always easy. As a result, Azusa didn't really see any play shortly after being printed. However, a deck eventually emerged in Modern that could put her to good use: Amulet Titan. This is a deck that looks to combine Amulet of Vigor with the Ravnica bounce lands. When you play a bounce land with the Amulet in play, that land will come into play untapped, which means you can tap it for the mana before it returns to your hand. Obviously, this combines well with Azusa since you can just play that land and get the mana over and over again. This lets you produce a ton of mana very quickly, which can eventually allow you to power out Primeval Titan or other threats. Amulet Titan has been a major force in Modern since 2014, and that's going to continue, meaning Azusa is going to continue to accumulate points going forward. That's true of pretty much every other card on this list too though, so moving up on it might not be that easy. At number 9, it is Bosiju, who shelters all. This land comes into play tapped, it can only produce colorless mana, and it can only do that if you pay 2 life. Those are all pretty big drawbacks, but the upside is that if you use the mana from Bosiju to cast an instant or sorcery, it can't be countered, and in some decks, combo decks in particular, that's of massive importance. Being able to cast your key combo piece without worrying about your opponent countering it is great. Unsurprisingly, combo decks are exactly the kinds of places where Bosiju has been played over the years in several different formats. In Standard and Extended, it was played in Enduring Ideal decks. In Modern, it's been played in Scapeshift and Ad Nauseam, and in Legacy, it's been played in Show and Tell. Apart from Enduring Ideal, all of those decks are still relevant in their respective formats, and that means Bosiju is likely to gain more points, in addition to the fact that it will also be included in any other instant or sorcery-based combo deck. At number 8, it is Kiki-Jiki, Mirror Breaker. He wasn't played at all in Block or Standard, but in other formats it became clear fairly quickly that Kiki could enable some sweet combos. However, he did start seeing play in Legacy in 2007, where he was part of the super broken Hulk Flash deck. This deck used Protean Hulk to quickly assemble combo pieces that could win the game right away. I've gone in depth on that combo in several other videos, so I'm not going to do it here, but suffice it to say that Kiki's ability to make copies of creatures enabled the deck to do as much damage as it wanted to when it got the combo pieces into play. That deck was quickly banned out of the format, and Kiki hasn't gained any points in Legacy since 2007. However, once the modern format was created in 2011, Kiki found a format where he could really thrive. There he was played in Splinter Twin decks. While plan A for those decks was usually to use Splinter Twin on a Deceiver, Exarch, or Pestermite and win the game with 1,000,000 tokens, plan B was to use Kiki Jiki in place of Splinter Twin. Like Twin, he could allow you to make as many tokens as you want, since each copy you make of the Exarch or Pestermite would allow you to untap Kiki Jiki. Kiki was also played in Birthing Pod decks, which ran several creature-based combos, since it could search up whatever creatures it wanted. In those decks, the plan was Kiki plus Restoration Angel, which would allow you to make 1,000,000 copies of the Angel. Eventually, Splinter Twin and Birthing Pod got banned out of Modern, and that has really slowed Kiki down over the last several years. Kiki has never been banned himself, but he's been part of the reason that cards like Birthing Pod, Splinter Twin, and Flash got banned. In Modern these days, he does see play in Court of Calling Toolbox decks, which play Kiki for the same reason he's always been played, to help you combo off. He's also being played in modern Twinless Exarch decks, which lean on Kiki Jiki as a combo piece alongside the Exarch. He is gaining points more slowly than the other cards on this list, and that might not bode well for him in the future. At number 7, it is Through the Breach. This instant can be used to cheat a creature into play. It also gives it haste, which is pretty crucial because the creature gets sacrificed at the end of the turn. This means that the creatures that you cheat into play kind of need to be able to do a lot with a single swing, but luckily there are plenty of cards that that's the case for. In Modern, Primeval Titan is cheated into play quite frequently, as is Emrakul, the Eon's Torn, and Gristlebrand. With Emrakul, you annihilate much of their board and do 15 damage, while Gristlebrand gets in for 7 and draws you at least 7 cards. You might have noticed that this spell has the Arcane type, and it can be spliced onto other arcane spells. This is a Kamigawa mechanic that wasn't great, but Through the Breach is actually a card that gets spliced sometimes, since in Modern it's played in decks alongside Goryo's Vengeance, another card that lets you cheat big creatures into play for a turn. If you can splice one of these onto another, it's pretty sweet because you end up getting the effect of the card you spliced without actually using it up. Anyway, in Legacy, it is often played alongside Show and Tell, where Gristlebrand is most frequently put into play. Playing the most powerful creatures in the game for cheap is always a great strategy in Magic, and that's going to continue to be the case. Through the Breach will continue to gain more points in Modern and Legacy going forward. At number 6, it is Gifts Ungiven. This instant lets you tutor up 4 cards in your deck, but your opponent chooses 2 of them, and they go to the graveyard while you get to keep the other 2. Obviously, your opponent is going to give you the things that they think are the least useful, but the trick is to search up things where your opponent doesn't really have a choice to make. The biggest way to do this is by grabbing cards with Flashback or Dredge, since if your opponent puts those in the yard, you can just use them anyway. Probably the most famous use of Gifts Ungiven is using it in Modern and searching up Unburial Rites and a reanimation target. If you search up only 2 cards with gifts, your opponent has to put them both in the graveyard, which means you can untap and reanimate some really scary card. It's also used in Modern Storm decks in a similar fashion with Past in Flames, which if you search it up, your opponent has no choice but to let you use it one way or another, at which point you can generate a massive storm count and win the game. So yeah, in those types of decks, Gifts just sets up your win condition, giving your opponent virtually no way to prevent you from assembling what you need. Gifts Ungiven is also played in Vintage Storm. It's going to continue gaining points going forward, but there's a pretty big gap between it and the cards above it. At number 5, it is Forbidden Orchard. This land can tap for mana of any color, but it comes with a pretty hefty downside. It gives your opponent a 1/1 spirit every time you use it. This is the kind of card that you just shouldn't play in the vast majority of decks, but Forbidden Orchard gets here entirely by virtue of being an incredibly important card in Oath of Druids decks, which have been a force in Vintage ever since this card was printed. Obviously, the key with Oath decks is to get to activate it so that you can cheat some huge creature into play, but a key to making the card trigger is that your opponent has to have more creatures than you. And if they don't play creatures, you're never going to get to use it. Well, the Orchard makes sure that this is the case. Basically, in an Oath deck, the Orchard is a land that taps for any color that also has massive upside because it enables your deck's primary plan, frequently allowing you to go off on turn 2. In addition to gaining points in Oath decks in both Legacy and Vintage, the Orchard was also used a little bit in Extended and Modern combo decks where its primary purpose was just good fixing. Decks like Hypergenesis, Cephalid Breakfast, and Living In didn't really care if your opponent had a 1/1, they just wanted to make sure that they could cast what they needed to. They planned on trying to win before the token ever mattered, and actually, in the case of Living In, the token would just get blown up anyway. Oath of Druids has been and will continue to be a fixture in the Eternal formats. And that bodes well for Forbidden Orchard, because there aren't really any other places where it would make a whole lot of sense to play it these days. At number 4, it's Lava Spike. This is certainly the simplest card on this list, as all it is a bad version of Lightning Bolt. It's a sorcery, and it can't target creatures. This really shows you how good Lightning Bolt is, though, since a card that is strictly worse is still a card that has seen a ton of play over the years. There's really only one type of deck that wants a card like this, of course, and that's burn decks. Burn decks look to do a ton of direct damage in a hurry. But outside of that kind of deck, a card like Lava Spike just isn't very good because it doesn't actually impact the board. But 3 damage for 1 mana is a benchmark for burn spells, and burn decks tend to be loaded up with cards that can do that. The Spike didn't gain any points in block or standard, as there wasn't a critical mass of burn spells and it took a few years to start being played. Since 2008, though, the Spike has been very active, gaining points in Extended, Modern, Legacy, and Pauper, with Modern the format where Lava Spike has found the most success. It will continue to gain more points going forward. At number 3, it is Glimpse of Nature. For only a single green mana, this sorcery makes it so that every creature you cast for the rest of your turn draws you a card. If your deck has a lot of cheap creatures in it, this can net you some cards, which is cool, but Glimpse hasn't just been used to draw a few cards. It's been used in decks that use it to draw their entire library and win the game the turn they cast it. The deck to first harness that power was Extended Elves, starting in 2008. The game plan was to play a bunch of cheap elves, including Birchlore Rangers, Heritage Druid, and Nettle Sentinel. This would allow all your elves to tap for mana, and because Nettle Sentinel untapped every time you played a green spell, it was constantly untapping. It got especially potent with multiple Nettle Sentinels around. Once you got those 3 in play, you could just keep casting elves over and over until you draw your whole deck, at which point you would win the game with either Grape Shot or Predator Dragon. This was such a powerful strategy that ultimately Glimpse of Nature was banned out of Extended, and when Modern was created in 2011, it got banned there too. However, Glimpse is legal in Legacy, where elf combo decks built around Glimpse of Nature have been doing great things for more than a decade at this point. Like everything on this list, Glimpse is still seeing plenty of play today. At number 2, it is Sakura Tribe Elder, which is pretty much rampant growth on a stick. It doesn't have good stats, of course, but the fact that this snake can come down, block, and sacrifice to search up a basic land is a great deal. And it was even better back in the day, because damage used the stack when it was printed. This meant you could use the Elder to block an X1, put its damage on the stack, and then sacrifice the Elder, and the creature it blocked would still die. Still, even if damage no longer uses the stack like that, the Elder is great. As you might expect, it has pretty much only been played in various ramp decks over the years. Some of its highlights include Heartbeat of Spring ramp decks in Block and Standard, and Valakut Scapeshift decks in Modern. It's going to continue to gain points, of course, but it basically has no chance of ever catching the number 1 card on this list, which has such a high score, it will make your head spin. And that card is Sensei's Divining Top. This card might look harmless, but it turned out it was not only a powerful card, but one that slowed games of Magic down to an almost unbearable slog. It gives you a powerful card selection effect that can be played in just about any deck because it's colorless, and that means people were using the top pretty much every turn, and you can imagine how that would slow the game down. It was a staple in Kamigawa Block Constructed. Out of a possible 8 top 8s in Kamigawa Block Constructed, the top got 7 of them. It wasn't nearly as prolific in Standard, but that's okay, because it was also played in just about every mid-ranger control deck in Extended. It became such a problem there that it was ultimately banned out of the format. Getting rid of the card simultaneously powered down several decks and made games of Magic a lot faster. It also got banned in Modern when the format was created in 2011. However, it has been incredibly prolific in the Eternal formats, especially Legacy. It's been particularly nice in Legacy, where it helped enable Miracle decks, which would have no problem casting things for the Miracle cost as long as you had the top around. It was also combined with Counterbalance in both Extended and Modern, and the top could really help you counter anything your opponent tried to do when you combined it with that. After several years of dominance, the top ultimately got banned in Legacy in 2017, but it is still legal in Vintage, where it also sees a massive amount of play. It's pretty close to a staple there. It's going to continue to gain points in Vintage going forward, which means it will have no problem holding on to its top spot on this list. So those are the 10 champions of Kamigawa cards that have left the biggest mark on competitive Magic. As you can see, this list is incredibly stacked, and pretty much everything on it has been played with regularity, over a long period of time. Hopefully this list showed you that Champions is very far from being a weak set as it is often billed. If you want to own any of these powerful Kamigawa cards, check out the description where you can find direct Card Kingdom links for each card in this video. If you want to make sure you catch future videos, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications. If you want to catch up on past MTG Top 10s, including many more that look at particular sets, you should see a playlist on your screen shortly. Lastly, if you want to go the extra mile in supporting the channel, you can do that on Patreon. Thanks for watching.